Wonderful. Right. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jon Watts. I'm a director and co-founder at a consultancy called MTM. We are a research and strategy consultancy specializing in helping companies understand and respond to digitally driven change. We are lucky enough to work with a huge smorgasbord of the great, the good, and occasionally less than good of the communications, media, and technology sectors. We essentially help companies understand what's happening in very fast-changing markets, and then we help them figure out what to do about it. In terms of our data, where we get our insights from, we spend a lot of time trawling through the established industry data sets and sources globally. We work very internationally. We conduct a huge range of industry depths, surveys, and so on and so forth. We spend our time talking to the network. We talk to the industry about what's happening. We're great believers that you have to do that, unfortunately, to figure out what's going on. We have an analytics team who spend their time trying to extrapolate trends and to figure out what's really going on. And then we have an award-winning consumer research team. So you put all that together, and we basically spend our time helping clients do things like explore the competitive dynamics of the online video market across EMEA, develop growth strategies for their online video services, figure out business plans in complicated, fast-moving markets, analyze the growth of new developments like programmatic, or think about things like pricing, packaging, and positioning of their VOD offerings. So today, I'm basically going to cover 3 topics. I'm going to pull lots and lots of different things together to give you a sort of broad oversight of the industry, a sense of, hopefully, where we are with some of the new, interesting, exciting things happening in TV and video advertising, obviously with a focus on targeted, dynamic ad insertion, and a bit of a flavor of programmatic. I should apologize in advance because, one, I'm English, so I'm going to speak quite quickly. I'll probably mumble from time to time. And secondly, apologies, some of the slides are quite text-heavy. So I'm sure Michelle will distribute them afterwards. So if you can't read it all because I'm going too fast, don't worry, don't panic. You'll get a copy afterwards. I'm going to cover 3 things very broadly. So first of all, just a quick scene setter. What's happening in TV and video advertising. Paint the broad picture. I'm sure you will all be deeply familiar with most of it, but hopefully it'll get us all on the same page. I'll talk a bit about what's happening in dynamic ad insertion and programmatic. And then just to end, I'll pull out some of our experiences from other markets about what you kind of have to get right to make these things actually happen in reality in very complex, fast-moving TV and video ad sales markets. So, the bit you know, what's happening? So, the most obvious part of the story is that TV has obviously shifted from being a linear delivered medium to being part of a much wider ecosystem, an ecosystem of connected devices, boxes that now deliver many, many different types of video content, and so on and so forth. It's still a deeply fragmented market. So when you look at the big broadcast platforms, they operate as very distinct, often quite self-contained walled gardens or ecosystems. But that is starting to change, but we're right at the beginning of that change. It's got a long way to go yet. When we look at the 3 big buckets of the TV and video market, we see quite different developments. So if we start with traditional linear TV advertising, the good news for broadcasters is that I think despite the protestations to the contrary, linear TV viewing is still pretty robust. It's mature, but it's robust. It's at best low growth. The difficulty is that it's widely believed to be declining, and for some types of content and for some demos, it is actively being time-shifted. So if you're a multi-channel broadcaster delivering scripted TV content, it's likely that the majority of your viewing now in households that have PVRs, TV VOD platforms, and so on, is time-shifted. It's not being watched linear. And we expect to see that grow, particularly with some demographics. 16 to 24s, always light TV viewers, are increasingly consuming their media in on-demand ways, often drawn towards channel brands or digital brands that their parents don't like, don't want to know about, and so on. So you have a very fragmented market starting to emerge. We still see top shows attracting really big audiences, and that still remains TV's USP. Replicating that in any digital platform is incredibly difficult, but it's getting more fragmented. If you look at peak audiences for shows, they've gradually declined in almost every advanced Western market. The big shows are just generally getting smaller audiences. The audience is more scattered. We see new technologies like linear dynamic ad insertion and so on making their way gradually into the market, but they're still really nascent and half-formed. And I think importantly, they're predominantly being driven by TV platforms, not by broadcasters in most markets. And we'll come back and talk about that. There's been lots of innovation in other areas, so things like Shazam, sort of second screen syncing, but the reality is it's minuscule. It's a very, very small pot of revenue. Most of the additional formats that we've added to TV just don't scale very well. They're very hard for agencies to plan and buy large volumes in, which is a real problem. The second bit of good news, I suppose, is that broadcaster VOD advertising has grown pretty fast. It's predominantly been driven by video players distributed across open online video platforms. So with almost every broadcaster we work with, the majority of their online video revenues are not coming from TV VOD platforms. They're coming from video players on tablets, web, mobile phones, and so on and so forth. That allows them to take more control of those offerings. There's no intermediary, there's no gatekeeper like a TV platform that they're dependent on, but it does have limitations. It means that as an agency, you're still not always getting TV VOD actually on the TV. You're getting it on other devices, and that does raise pricing questions. TV VOD advertising is coming, but if we look at advanced markets like the UK or Holland, it's still a very small part of the market. It's got quite a long way to go to catch up with the online video component. And then the problem. So sitting alongside broadcast, we have this huge world, this fragmented ecosystem of dozens of different types of online video. So we have non-broadcast media firms, internet purists or natives like HuffPo, magazine publishers, and other businesses increasingly selling video. They don't often do it very well because they don't have a real guarantee of supply. Their volumes are very spiky, so they often have to trade through exchanges and the like to really gain volume. But it is growing in volume. We have huge beasts like YouTube and Facebook. We have SSPs like Adapt TV, LiveRail, DSPs like TubeMogul. We have the big exchanges, most of which deal in video. We have video on mobile services. And none of these systems talk very well together, but increasingly they are being integrated. Increasingly, as an agency, you can go into a single exchange or a single platform and buy pretty systematically across most of these. It's a bit erratic still, but it is coming, and it's coming faster than unified TV and video is coming. For a long time, when we worked for broadcasters, they were very dismissive of this kind of non-broadcast type of media. They'd say that only TV companies know how to make great TV content. They'd say that it's small and scatty. You'd hear the phrase dogs on skateboards as a sort of way of caricaturing or insulting YouTube. I just don't think that's true anymore. When we talk to media agencies now, they increasingly see this alternative ecosystem as a very viable fifth channel, so to speak. The quote there is from Starcom MediaVest. We genuinely believe that we will come to think of this video ecosystem as a fifth channel. We will plan it inside a TV plan. It will be particularly impactful for 16 to 24s, and it will capture significant amounts of money and growing amounts of money. And also, it introduces agencies to new ways of trading and buying video, often with deeper and richer data sets, which are really powerful, very attractive, and often allow them to really sell it into advertisers, the end client, of course. It's worth saying as well that almost all the firms that trade in this space sell through multiple channels. So someone like a HuffPo or a Bauer, for example, a Huffington Post or a Bauer, will sell directly. They're probably investing in some sort of private marketplace if they have enough video. They're probably making video inventory available through a DSP, probably through exchanges. So there's a lot of different opportunities for agencies to buy, often at slightly different prices and in slightly different ways. You might buy context, you might buy audience, and so on. TV, as all of this starts to happen, is going to change. So we're sitting here in 2015, the sort of midpoint of the decade, and I suspect there's nobody in this room who believes that that fifth channel ecosystem of all the other online video businesses and the world of TV are not going to come close together over the next 5 years. And TV is shifting into that direction. So if you think about the next 5 years, I guess everybody would probably agree that, first of all, we're going to be moving into a world that is more non-linear. It'll still be predominantly linear, even by 2020, but everybody believes that non-linear will grow and be a larger part of the market. We believe that formats and content types will change, but it's probably the case that the number of shows which attract really large live audiences is also going to gradually decline. There'll still be big sports events bringing in mass audiences, but many other things are going to become much more fragmented. Social is going to be a much bigger part of the market. There are going to be other big players producing quality video, most obviously the Netflixes and HBOs of this world, companies that have not traditionally been in that broadcast world, in the case of Netflix, and often are funding this content without relying on ads. These are not ad-funded content offerings. They're funded by premium subscriptions, which raises challenges. And then lastly, we know that people like Facebook and YouTube are going to become much more integrated into the TV system. If you look at all of the activities of broadcast and producers on the YouTube platform, it's clearly becoming really established as a close and integral part of the TV talent process. People like Channel 4 in the UK using it to test formats and ideas. We see talents and personalities starting to make their way off YouTube into telly. It's going to become much more seamless. So TV, in trying to respond to this fifth channel ecosystem, faces some pretty complicated challenges, and I wanted to just zoom in on three. So first of all, TV still is predominantly planned and bought using the good old traditional audience measurement panels, which do a really great job of telling us about age, gender, and socio-demographics, but they don't tell us much else. If we look at the world of online video, it's far easier to integrate data sets that tell us something about behavior, intent, and other things, which all create problems for TV. Lots of agencies, when we talk to them, look at what they can do in online video, and they say, TV has its strengths, but online allows us to do some slightly different things, which feel really powerful. We'd love it if TV could do some of those. Second problem is that broadcasters have done a brilliant job at proliferating their video across tablets, smartphones, web platforms, it's on PVRs, and so on and so forth. The difficulty is that as an agency, planning consistently across all these different media is still really hard to do. There is no really great cross-platform planning. Some companies are getting close to it. So if you look at, say, a Channel 4 in the UK again, which has a registration wall, for the vast majority of its consumption, they can do quite good things now with planning. They're trying to align that with Barb so that as an agency you'll be able to buy across. But it's very hard to get registration onto TV VOD platforms in a consistent way. So there are still problems. But today, for most broadcasters, it's very difficult to enable an agency to plan consistently across different screens. Third problem that telly has is that a huge proportion of TV shows, and indeed channels, just get 0 rating. So as the markets become more fragmented, when we look at, say, the UK market, Sky will famously claim that around 30% of spots on commercial multi-channel services have, for all intents and purposes, no value. Because in a very fragmented market, the audiences are too small. We've got one bar panelist per 5,000 members of the audience, and we're just not capturing any rating. It's a 0 rating service, so they can't sell it. So you have this difficulty in a fragmented world that a portion of inventory just attracts no value. I think the same is true in Holland. It's true in most markets. So what are broadcasters doing about these problems? Well, there are lots of different things, but there's 4 main directions of travel, which we see pretty much in common across every broadcast market. So the first thing, most obviously, is that pretty much every broadcaster has invested very heavily to create a state-of-the-art VOD or OTT offering. Our team has just about finished doing a really extensive analysis of the OTT offerings of all the major European broadcasters. And the really positive thing is how sophisticated and advanced they all are. I have to say, they do all look pretty damn similar. So they're all basically designed on the same kind of template, but they all work. They all deliver pre- and mid-roll advertising. They've all clearly attracted quite a lot of investment, and they work across lots of different devices. So there's been a wave of investment which has really delivered results. That's been great. Second thing we see is a whole range of initiatives around data. Most obviously. We think there are 3 broad buckets that you can probably talk about. So first of all, we have industry-wide investment in better viewing panels. So really attempts to sort of close the fragmentation gap by doing a better job at capturing TV and video viewing. We think most of these efforts are always going to be problematic. So if you look at the rate at which the panels are reconstituted to take account of change in the market, it's often just not fast enough to take account of shifts. So it's never going to be perfect, but it can do a better job of being good enough, we think. And you see these investments in almost every market. Second thing we see is much greater use of set-top box data. So Sky, for example, in the UK, with its Sky IQ platform, now runs a panel of 500,000 boxes which are polled, and it can generate very actionable intelligence and insight from that. So, for example, they will look at how their most attractive and valuable subscribers are consuming video content using Sky IQ data, and they will figure out how much they should be bidding for rights. And we see those initiatives in lots of markets. There is, of course, a problem, which is that set-top box data is generally owned by platforms, and it's not always the case they make it available on attractive terms to broadcasters, but that'll come perhaps. And then the third thing we see is much greater use of data across the broadcasting ecosystem to fill in the gaps around things like regional and lifestyle attributes, household composition, socio-demographics, these sorts of things. So most broadcasters are just getting more data savvy. They've recognized that online has really pioneered the use of data, and they're doing the same. Big agencies like Experian, people like dunnhumby and the like, Kantar, GfK, are all increasingly closely aligned with the TV advertising world. The third big development we see, which we will come on and talk about in a moment, is around addressability. So using data and platforms to deliver different ads to specific platforms. It is by far and away more advanced in the States than anywhere else, for a set of reasons we'll talk a bit about in a moment. But it's clearly much talked about. Everybody is interested in, certainly in the VOD world, where it's pretty established, and increasingly in linear, where it's much more problematic. And then the fourth big area of developments we see is programmatic, so automating the process of buying and selling TV and video. Again, really quite advanced now in the online video market. When you look outside of the broadcaster ecosystem, increasingly large volumes of programmatic are being sold, of video are being sold programmatically. So in the UK, it will be about 30% last year, we're estimating, of the non-broadcast component, and growing quite quickly. Partly, of course, it's just a response to scatter. It's the same role that ad networks used to play in the display market. In other words, you can't have a relationship with every single media owner, and the supply is very erratic, so you stick it all in exchange and try to sell it that way. So what do agencies think about these four big areas? Well, these are the results of a survey that we conducted of a small group of senior media agency executives, just to get a sense of what they're interested in. And the obvious sort of thing that stands out is that when you look at the bottom half of the graph, they're kind of less interested in some of those non-scalable formats I talked about. Some of them are still pretty interested, but they're not that interested. Sorry, the blue should be quite interested. I think the thing has dropped off. The thing they're most interested in are these top five, so programmatic, dynamic ad insertion, and so on and so forth. Obviously, interest is not the same as intent or indeed ability to buy. But the demand is there. Agencies have seen some of this stuff in the online world, and they do want it in the TV world. Why do they want it? Well, they think there are various benefits. The interesting thing I think about this graph is how scattered perceptions of the benefits are. There is no one overarching benefit that agencies seem most interested in. They want to see dynamic creative, they want to see targeting. Sorry, there's some text that's dropped off there, but they want to see cross-channel delivery, a whole set of different bits and pieces. There's no particular uniform dimension to it. Partly, we think, because of lack of understanding about how these platforms will actually get executed. So when we follow up these kinds of surveys with just a little bit of depth analysis, you find that agencies are still a bit confused over who's going to do what and bring what into the market. From the point of view of addressable, I think the really big message is that most agencies are arguing the real promise of addressable is that it will bring new advertisers into the market. So traditionally, obviously, TV is being purchased against indices. So you define your group, you look at which programs they index most heavily against, and you buy. But inevitably, there will be some wastage. Wastage in TV advertising is a really problematic concept. So if you talk to, say, a Unilever, their concept of wastage is very different to, say, someone trying to sell sports cars. But the general view, I think, from agencies is that by eliminating wastage, by allowing much greater targeting of much more tightly defined groups, we will bring new advertisers into the market. So if you look at Sky's AdSmart, its pitch to the market is not that it's going to reinvent the world of television. TV trading makes that really hard. The joy of AdSmart, from Sky's point of view, so they claim, is that it will bring new advertisers in. The big push has been local. So they will talk about car dealerships. They will talk about retail promotions. They're talking about taking money off radio and off print, not trying to grow their share of the TV ad market. They may grow their margin in the TV ad market by offering ad-smart services to other broadcasters, but they're not at this stage trying to grow the share of their sales house in that space. The problems, of course, is that with all this funky new stuff in the TV market, programmatic, dynamic ad insertion, and so on and so forth, there are some really big barriers. So technology is still a barrier. The platforms for dynamic ad insertion are still immature. They are really immature, and I think we're going to hear a bit about that shortly. When we've reviewed developments in the States, they've tended to be driven by very, 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 very large cable operating platforms with 10, 20, 30, 50 million households. And it has taken a long time and a lot of investment, and often they still don't work that well. They're not as flexible as a really state-of-the-art online video exchange. Partly because set-top boxes are complicated and a bit clunky, and cable networks are difficult, and TV has lots of problems associated with it. So the tech is immature. Measurement is still problematic. In the UK, we were surprised to discover that we had done the first ever study trying to prove that demographically based targeting in the online video world delivered superior results. We won an MRS award for it. It proved, unsurprisingly, that delivering more relevant ads does indeed deliver better results. But it was flabbergasting that in 2013, that was the first ever study done at scale across multiple campaigns with VOD inventory. Flabbergasting. But measurement is still not there. People want to see much greater evidence that the different ways of targeting advertising will really deliver a superior return, especially if the prices are going to be cranked up. And lastly, some think that the barriers are predominantly sell-side. Again, this is agencies talking. So in other words, it's hard to buy the inventory. The platform's not there. They don't see a consistent, unified approach that allows them to buy easily and straightforwardly. The biggest problem, I think we would argue, with almost all of the new forms of TV and video advertising, as they try to get into the TV market specifically, is just the horror of the TV industry landscape. It's really fragmented, really fragmented. When you look at the organizations that have really driven it, it's tended to be because they had quite specific skill sets. So by any stretch of the imagination in the UK, Sky is by far the leader in dynamic ad insertion on its platform. And it had four things, in fact, that allowed it to do that. Number one, it owned the platform itself, end to end, including the set-top boxes, which it managed. So it could do what it wanted. They took a long time to do it because set-top boxes are painful and difficult things to deal with, but they owned the platform. If you look at free-to-air broadcasters, they generally don't own the platform, so they've got a huge handicap to start with. Second thing that Sky had was channels. It owned inventory, so it could experiment or apply AdSmart or put AdSmart gaps into its own channels and run it in that way. Lots of other operators, like Virgin Media, for example, in the UK, don't own channels, so they've got to somehow barter with broadcasters to gain access to that inventory. Third thing that Sky had was a kind of semi-owned technology arm, NDS. NDS was an Israeli firm that Murdoch acquired and really used to power the early days of Sky. It was acquired by Cisco, and it really led the development of AdSmart. But it was a very unique business with very deep skills in broadcast engineering, IP networking, the ability to really scale up a team and do something very, very, very complex. There is an AdSmart presentation that NDS have, which kind of has one diagram, which I think is their WOW diagram. And it's just a systems diagram showing the process flow for AdSmart. And the only takeaway you get from it is it's incredibly complicated. Finding technology firms that can deliver that is really hard. And the last thing that Sky had was it had a sales house. It had a market-leading sales house with just under a quarter of the UK ad sales market. It really, really understood both the concerns, issues, and anxieties, the wants, needs, and preferences of agencies and buyers, and it was able to integrate that with channels, technology, and so on and so forth in a perfectly formed package. It's still taken them about 8 years to get it done, and it's still very, very small. Across the rest of the TV ecosystem, and this diagram is stolen shamelessly from Modi Media in the US, it's a very difficult picture. Trying to assemble these collaborations is really difficult. It requires a lot of project management, and not many people do it well or easily. When we look at the programmatic space, there are a similar set of problems. This is a long quote, so apologies for that. But the basic issue is that traditional TV ad inventory management systems are just not geared up to allow agencies and other people who want to dynamically serve ads into them to do it easily or straightforwardly. There's a huge compliance system built up around TV advertising. Generally, broadcasters are responsible for the ads. That means you've got to have the ad pre-complied before you let it anywhere near your channel. But most broadcast systems, most programmatic systems, don't allow that to happen easily. So in the US and other markets, people are finding ways around that. But trying to get that to happen, regulators are not known for acting swiftly or speedily, is really complicated and difficult. So we're not holding our breath for a significant scale programmatic offering to make its way into the linear TV market anytime soon. It's just going to take time. So what that means is that for the next 5 years, you've probably got a TV and video market which will look increasingly fragmented. In other words, it'll be running at different speeds. So you'll have a linear TV market at the top, which will start to go programmatic slowly and gradually, but it's going to require real structural change. And most of the programmatic will be quite limited in scope. It's not going to allow much in the way of dynamic ad insertion into linear via programmatic channels. We'll see broadcaster VOD starting to move, we think, in slightly different directions. Big broadcasters adopting essentially programmatic direct techniques or private marketplaces, if those can deliver some efficiencies in trading. But the long tail of broadcasters, those who deliver very small ratings, who probably don't have the investment or the scale to build out private marketplaces or similar platforms, will move in a very different direction, possibly starting to look at putting inventory into different platforms and systems. And then online video, where we believe that by 2020, almost all the non-broadcast inventory will be sold programmatically, apart from a few bits of cherry-picked content, the real premium stuff, which will be sold direct. So you'll have slightly different movements, slightly different paces. Summarizing, I suppose, from that piece, going forwards, we think if you want to enable this stuff in a TV advertising market, if broadcasters and platform operators are really serious about making it happen, replicating what online video platforms are delivering, albeit with their difficulties, there are probably 5 things you have to worry about. So the first is connectivity. You kind of need some consistent way of delivering the content across platforms. So for example, if you look at, say, free-to-air platforms in most markets, they're horribly fragmented. They have different broadband connections connecting into smart TVs. You have different ways of getting free-to-air content across different types of platform. It's a real mess, basically. TV is a very fragmented ecosystem. You need some common platform to enable something consistent across all those markets. Second thing you need is money. There's a reason why big cable companies in the US with billions and billions of dollars to invest, have really led some of this. Ditto Sky. It takes time and it takes money. It takes a lot of money to invest in this stuff. In smaller markets, either where the competitive dynamics are slightly different and there are fewer incentives to invest, or where the broadcasters just don't have the cash, basically, we think it'll move much more slowly. The benefits just aren't really there. Third thing is competition. So you really need some spur to either the platforms or the broadcasters, or both, a fear, in other words, to get them really incentivized and motivated to start acting in a coordinated fashion to make this happen. In some markets, you've got that. In the UK, for example, there's a general sort of move in this direction, slowly and painfully. But in other markets, the fear isn't there yet. One might mention the Germans, for example, where it's a slower, more difficult, more complicated market. The fear doesn't seem to be quite as strong. Fourth thing, platforms have got to have access to inventory. You've got to find a way of bringing the two things together. If you don't, it's not going to happen. You can come to different partnerships and models for making that work, but you're probably trialing new ground to some extent because there aren't that many precedents for this working really well at scale across big markets. And then lastly, and I'll return to this, data and measurement really are the key. If you don't have good data and measurement, almost none of the new stuff is going to work at all. So, just very quickly, because I suspect I'm probably running marginally short on time. Oh well. I've talked too fast. Just a few sort of thoughts in terms of experiences from other businesses we worked with, from other markets, about what has to happen to make this work well. So, The first thing I think you have to acknowledge is that if you're trying to bring either any form of future TV ad technology to market, either because you're a platform or a broadcaster, you're going to need real operational strengths. As I mentioned in the Sky example earlier, you need really strong project managers, very careful operational planning. You need technology, ad sales, a whole set of different skill sets working quite harmoniously. There are growing numbers of track records and precedents for organizations doing this, but don't underestimate how much complexity you're going to get associated, you're going to have to deal with. There are very few big firms that can help you to do this. It's quite difficult and rare. The second thing you're going to need is a real savviness and happiness with data. I keep saying this. You're probably all bored of hearing it now. But unless your organization lives, breathes, and is comfortable with data, it's just not going to happen. Partly because your buyers are going to want you to be happy and savvy and used to dealing with data. Partly because online video is still moving very rapidly ahead in developing new ways of synthesizing and combining data. There are genuinely complex platforms out there doing really quite sophisticated things. But also because you won't be able to measure whether any of it works. So it'll be a bit of a waste of time, certainly from the agency's point of view. The third thing you have to plan for is a really long ROI. So Sky sort of technically launched AdSmart in 2014, but they'd started worrying about it sort of here around 2008. So it was 5 years of work before they got to pilot stage, and that was with relatively large teams of people working on it. So if you are going to bring something new to market, it's just going to take you quite a long time to do it if you're going to do it at scale. I think relatedly, the next point we would make, we're not one of those businesses that believes TV trading, the traditional ways of buying and selling television, are fundamentally broken. I think quite the contrary. They work incredibly well. They allow agencies to spend huge amounts of money relatively quickly, relatively efficiently, with econometrically valid testing to show that most of the advertising worked, at least to some extent. If you compare that to, say, mobile, I spoke to a mobile agency recently who said that they'd spent 3 days trying to place a £50,000 campaign. You know, it's just painful and difficult. So if you're going to bring something new to market, you have to really think carefully about how you're going to align it with traditional models of TV trading rather than trying to work against it. I think some of the best thinking we've seen in this space is by firms like TubeMogul, whose paper on programmatic TV and video I would strongly recommend to you. They paint what I think is the most consistent vision of how TV trading and programmatic can slot together and align well. How programmatic in particular can fill that gap of planning around the long zero-rating channels and really add something new and different to the market in a way that's quite complementary to traditional TV trading. But if you try to just break the back of agencies and go in with something new and expect them to spend lots of money, it's not going to work terribly well. And then lastly, if you're bringing one of these new platforms or products to market and you're purely focused on trying to take money from existing TV advertising, I don't think your numbers are going to stack up. So the Sky business case for AdSmart depends upon bringing new money into the TV market. It depends upon finding new advertisers who previously had not invested in television for whatever reason, and encouraging them to spend money by showing that TV can deliver ROI against their objectives without huge expense or horrible amounts of wastage. This is from a recent Sky presentation, and it just tells you where they think they're going. It tells you that the market they're targeting is all the stuff that isn't telly, and it tells you that to date, for AdSmart, the majority of the money is either new to Sky or new to TV completely. Only about a third of it is traditional people who've spent with Sky Media. I think that sort of business case is probably going to be true for lots of other similar technologies. That's it. I've raced through fast. Am I ahead of time?
Oh, you're doing great, Jon. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jon.